Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Christine Nichlos. I appreciate the fact that you've taken time out of your day to join us as we talk about the recruiting continuum. I hope that your gains today are significant. This is a very popular topic. We've actually been asked to repeat this several times, so we thought we'd run it in a full webinar that's actually being recorded. If you look over to the right on your screen, you should be able to see a section for questions and answers. If anytime during the broadcast you'd like to ask a question, if you could just type it in there. Either I have two attendants with us today, Jessica Roberto, our Director of Process Engineering, and Michael Valentino, a Talent Advisor and Head of our Practice Lead for Training for Legal Science. And they're going to gather the questions, and then at the end of the program, or if we have some time midway, we'll stop and do a question check. Please feel free to keep the questions coming as we go along. So, the recruiting continuum. Before we get started, just a kind of definition of where the continuum and the thought of it came from. We actually coined the term and are trademarking it now back in 2007. But the essence of the recruiting continuum is that it allows you to take a step back out of talent acquisition and take a look at the big picture. So in order to get us started, I'd like to show you a quick clip that gets us all in the same headset. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as we do. It kind of takes you out of your myopic view of the world, right, and pushes it out. This is actually from the Zoom books. Those of us with kids starting back from the 80s and moving forward have probably enjoyed them. If you haven't seen one, we do it directly at the end. They'll tell you about the books and where you can get the video. But the idea here is to take a look at your recruiting from that bigger picture. Another title for this program is How Good Is My Recruiting, My Talent Acquisition Really? That was one of the popular titles that we have, because the purpose of today is to show you the continuum and help you along the way do some self-grading and some self-analytics of where you are in the scheme of talent acquisition as a whole. So this, in fact, is the recruiting continuum. The reason, and let me just give you an idea of how we came up with this. So we've been doing talent acquisition and recruiting consulting, meaning we've been helping companies take a look at their talent acquisition from beginning to end and take it to different levels since our inception in '97. And about the same time, we had some clients that said to us, this is great, we can do part, can you do the other part? And the term for that today is RPO. And we continue to be an organization that does those two things. So back in the early 2000s, I got a phone call from a CEO who said, how come you're able to help us get this to another level and we weren't able to do it ourselves? And I threw it back to the team, and we all sat down and said, why is this going so well? Because frankly, we were surprised. We did not anticipate the kind of results that we were getting, augmenting them. In this case, it was switch engineers and telecommunications. And what happened is we laid recruiting flat, and that's where you see this flat line across the board. And we said, these are the elements of recruiting: defining and attracting, so understanding what you're looking for and then going after it, and then the actual act of recruiting, which sometimes is that holistic view, right? But the actual act of recruiting, interviewing, onboarding, reporting, communicating. And then we said, but that's not enough. Those are the segments. If you kind of think about it this way, whether you do anything about it or not, a recruiting initiative has its own life cycle, and this is the cycle. It starts from define, it ends in onboarding and communications. And the whole time you have candidate processing going on, and you have data collection going on. So the question, as it came to us, we thought, well, if we are in fact optimizing each one of these, this is why we're getting a better result. Then we went back, applied it to the continuum, and that's what we saw. So that's our cornerstone. That's the secret sauce here at People Science. Actually, not too big a secret. It's been on our website for some time too. And you'll be able to go to our website at the end and do a self-analysis of this yourselves. But I encourage you to stay with us. And just as we take a look at the buckets of the continuum, as we call them. So we'll start with define and attract, move to recruiting, interviewing, offers, declines, reporting, and communications. This is kind of a grocery list of what these items look like. I do want to explain one other way to look at it. And we just started to talk about this a few minutes ago, but these are the pieces that happen in every recruiting cycle. So let's say, for example, I meet Harry, and Harry says, hey, Christine, I work for such and such. I work for ABC Company. And I, as the possible candidate, said, okay, you work for ABC Company. He's just define and attract, and kind of my brand now is whatever Harry looks like and whatever Harry is saying. That's my interpretation of his brand. And that's all I really know about the company, or maybe I know a little bit more from the name, who knows. Right there, he's defining, and I'm attracted because he said that. And he says, by the way, I have a position open now, we're moving into recruiting. Would you be interested in the position? I say yes. He says, you look like an eligible candidate. He offers me. He writes and tells everybody I hired Christine, who I am, and it's all communicated. And we actually went through the whole recruiting continuum. It's that simple and it's that easy. I put it in a simplistic form, but these, in fact, are all the elements of what happens in a recruiting cycle. And if we take a scientific approach and we say, what are those elements, then we're able to take a deep dive and say, how good am I at each one of these? And then when you raise the efficiencies of them, then you see a better outcome. You see better hires, you see them come faster, and you see all the good outcomes that we're all looking for. So, under define and attract. You may or may not have seen this billboard. If you haven't seen it and you're not a developer, it may not mean a lot to you. But this billboard was actually ran back in the early 2000s. I think it was 2001. What I find most interesting about this is this was a billboard when you worked at Yahoo and you pulled into the Yahoo parking lot. At the site where most of those developers worked, you saw this billboard. Now, if you're a developer, this is a very enticing billboard because it's like, wow, I can solve that. So the developers went into the office, solved the equation, and at the end of the equation, a pop-up came up and said, congratulations, you've just qualified to apply for a job here at Google. This is the early 2000s. And if you'll remember, Yahoo compared to Google in the 2000s as far as development, well, we see a lot of catch-up going on now than back then. So I've tried to find something even more earth-shattering than this lately, and I haven't, because I think this is a really, really good example. And one of the reasons I think it's a good example, besides the fact that it's Google talking to Yahoo, it's amazing, it's interesting, it also is not dependent at all on technology. So when we're looking at defining and attracting, and as I talk about today, I'll talk about things we're doing here at People Science. I'll talk about what we've collectively analyzed from customers, and I'll give you examples of some of those customers. And while I'm doing that, just so you know, our customers range inside from mid-market, anywhere from 1,000 employees all the way up to over 300,000 employees, just to kind of give you an idea. And we'll try to preference what we're telling you by the size of the company, because we think they'll help. But in any case, is technology, here's a good question for yourself, is technology beating out your creativity? Meaning, are you coming up with ideas like Google did with a billboard? Not that everybody should run out and have a billboard, but are you relying too much on what the job boards can do for you and what social media can do for you? Are you taking that step backwards? Are you thinking with that Zoom mentality that we looked at in the video to say, what else can we do creatively, especially for a tough to fill position? And does your brand effectively target all of your openings? You know, brand is such a hot topic right now. Well, I did hear from an analyst yesterday that brand is losing its popularity right now, which I thought was interesting because I kind of think we're just getting going on it. I think we're going to see it expand into a lot more than that. But how is your brand represented? If we go back to this billboard, so nobody's saying we're Google, we're the coolest out there. Let's just take that out. Let's pretend it wasn't Google. Let's pretend it was some different company that said, congratulations, you're now able to work at ABC Company. Your sentiment would still have different adjectives, wouldn't it? Let's just think about that for a second. So we're not using technology, but what are we learning about the company? It's innovative, because who the heck does this? It's out of the box. It's interested in me. We literally speak the same development language. So my brand is being emulated through every single job posting. My brand is being emulated through every single job. Brand is very important. So moving on to, do we have a clear expectation of the type of hire? So before you start recruiting, before you start building a strategy, one of the biggest issues that we see companies run into is their job descriptions might be effective. They may even be 2 months old. They may be 20 years old. But many times we'll start, or our clients will start recruiting, and in the end game, the hiring manager says, this first candidate didn't fit the bill at all. And that's because the position has changed. So get out in front of that, being in front of that and saying, I truly do understand, and we're going to talk about that in communications, what my hiring partners, what my hiring managers really are looking for. Therefore, advertising and defining and going in the right direction. What's the effectiveness of your branding? We just talked about that. Do you have a documented advertising plan? One more time, do you have a documented advertising plan? A lot of times we all think we've got it down in our head. When we write it down, it's different. If you take just a few minutes, it doesn't have to be something formal. Challenge yourself a little bit to say, what am I doing? Do I have a referral process? Am I using, what kind of advertising am I using? Measuring and monitoring the recruiting vehicles. There's so much technology out there these days, it can become confusing. We are going to talk about technology and talent acquisition in a few minutes, but measuring and monitoring those vehicles are crucial. You know, I like to sit down with the groups here at People Science and say, well, how is that going? And how is this new vehicle for recruiting going for you? A lot of times the answer I'll get is, it's really working out great. It's really fun. And I was like, okay, well, what does great mean? Like, how many candidates did we get? A lot. Well, let's define a lot. So if you keep challenging yourself to drill down, because gut is really important in recruiting, and especially if you think of it in a sales sense. You know, it's important in a sales, it's important in a talent acquisition sense, but so are metrics. And those two combined, perfect formula. But when one gets heavier, if you rely too hard on the metrics, and you rely too hard on what you think is working, you lose your pace. And then your employment site. Prior to coming into the meeting, some of the registrants, I was able to look at websites. Our team here was able to pull some of those up. Interesting. I mean, websites have really come a long way, but it's always good to take a look at it as an outsider. And I think one of the things that we witness, our implementation team witnesses when we come in, is people are a little hesitant to look at their website because it really does tell you what you look like out there to the public. And for some reason, we tend to want to run from that. Embrace the website. Embrace, you know, what it is you're putting out there, because that's how you make the change. So recruiting, the second part of our continuum. I love this picture. Is it reactive or is it proactive? You know, we made a list the other day of the two most common phrases that we hear from people in talent acquisition. And with all seriousness, the first one is, I'm drinking from a fire hose. And the second one is, I'm changing the wheels on the bus as it's moving. So we actually tried to find a picture of people changing the wheels on the bus moving, and it's not out there. And then we figured that that's because you cannot change the wheels on the bus while it's moving. You just can't. Nobody's even tried it, or there would be a picture about it, right? We found a couple guys with a Jeep, but it's just not the same thing. So one of the big challenges that recruiting and talent acquisition always has is, you know, you're doing your work and in comes, I need this, I need that. Another requirement pops up, another hiring manager stands there. And by the time you're done reactively recruiting, you have no time to switch to proactive. However, if you don't start to take that stance, you're always going to be proactive. So there's always going to be somebody at the door. It's always going to take longer to fill. You're never going to have enough time. So the key thing learning for us, for you, for today is, one, there's an incredible effect on how you do things when you can turn from reactive to proactive. A good way to start thinking about that and comparing yourself. So let's say you're in a company that makes 30,000 hires a year. In that case, you want to compare where you are in reactive and proactive to other companies that are making about the same kind of hires, and taking it even a little further, not just the same amount of hires, but the same kind of hires. If you have a large customer service team, a big sales division, a big engineering division, look for a competitor that makes the similar kind of hires. By the way, they're not always in the same industry, but a lot of times you can find the same job sectors. I mean, it's easy if you're in banking, right? If you're in banking, you can look at other banks. But if you're in banking, you might also want to look at some of the telcos that make similar kind of hires, because in a recruiting sense, in certain aspects, they're also your competition. So where are you? Are you being reactive? Are you being proactive? The reason this is such an important topic to us is we run in a parallel space with different types of companies. So our experience has been that the companies that have moved into proactive are shortening their time to fill, getting better candidates, and their retention rate is higher. Those are really significant. So as you start to look at moving into that proactive mode, even though you've got to go through the growing pains of turning it over, it's worth it. It happens. Documenting, once again, document. The right talent sets the right talent sets are in the right place at the right time for recruiting. We actually have a separate paper that if you're interested in, you can ask us. It talks about how the talent sets within recruiting are changing. Full cycle recruiting is being disseminated into different types of talent sets. So when you try to move into a reactive sense, you want to do an internal pool of not an internal examination, not just of what you're doing, but the talent sets that you have applying those things. So let's say, for example, you're taking a look at your team and you're having and the work and you're having great success in recruiting people via email. Whereas in telephone calls, you're not having as much success. That's your starting point with your talent sets. Now you need to look at your team and say, the person who's making or the people who are making these phone calls, are they as talented at making phone calls as the people doing emails are at making emails? That's how much this is fragmenting. So that's a whole other webinar. It's a whole other case study if you're interested. Again, we can get you there, but it's an important part to look at. Tracking the results also falls under that same umbrella. And then really, what is your reliance on outside vendors? Is it appropriate? The question that we like to see you ponder the most under this is it appropriate? Is the spend that you have, is the relationships that you have, are you leveraging them to the fullest, not just financially, but with the outcomes? Sometimes we come to relying on outside vendors and there's other things that we can do, either internally or other different types of vendors. So it's always important to do. On to interviewing. So we like this graphic because it's so simple, right? Specific, measurable, agreed, realistic, time-bound, ethical, and recorded. Wow, wouldn't it be great if every interview went that way? But some food for thought. I love this question in interviewing. Exactly what are your interviews based on? So if you were at the LinkedIn conference this year, or maybe you saw Laszlo bringing up Google again, but Laszlo from Google showed one of the most interesting statistic kind of studies I've seen. And Google brought in interns, or actually I think they were juniors in college, and put them in behind a wall watching interviews. They had 10 seconds of an interview. So they watched the first 10 seconds of an interview, and afterwards they pulled them and asked them, who do you think got hired? And the success rate of the interns and who they chose to be hired was so high. I think it was in the 90s. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but seriously, does that mean that juniors can come in, watch an interview, and take our jobs away because I'm on the first 10 seconds? Or does that mean that for the most part, we all become subjective in interviewing? I would suggest it's the latter, but that's the effect that it has, right? So as human beings, we are immediately attracted to people that we find commonalities with and the like. Another good example is if I'm interviewing someone and it reminds me of my aunt who I'm not fond of. Disclaimer, I don't have an aunt I'm not fond of. But an aunt that I'm not fond of, I'm probably going to process them out, at least partly in my brain, because I am an individual, I am a person, and we do tend to go. So from an HR perspective, we can do a lot to help our partners become more objective and understand that subjectivity is natural and how to work around it. The effectiveness of the candidate screen is number one way to do that. Because if you can get the best candidates in the door by screening them out ahead of time, all the better, because now it gets less subjective the further down the pipeline. Are your interviews updated? Or are you doing the same thing that you did before? Are you educating the hiring managers? Are you educating yourself? Are you staying educated on different types of interviewing practices? I mean, this is all we do here. And honestly, employment is my life. And just this morning, I read 3 articles from Fast Company about interviewing and learned even more. There's a lot to learn about interviewing. And it's interesting, too, because we find that recruiters say, I have the perfect formula for this. You know, we work with a hiring manager who, for every sales rep he brings in, he says, sell me this pen. He swears by that methodology. And then we have others that say, I would never do that. It's ludicrous. So it's interesting. We've kind of become somewhat married to questions and interview patterns that we like. So are we disrupting that a little bit as HR? Who's going to do that if we don't do it? The talent acquisition doesn't disrupt that a little bit. If it's not effective, or if it is effective, are we sharing it? Are we looking at it to judge and help them see, is it being effective? Do you have key elements in a good structured interview guide? I would really pose that back to you, because a good structured interview guide that starts with your commonalities of your organization and then moves into interview questions around the specific key elements or core competencies of the job tends to be the best vehicle that we've seen, best tool that you can use as far as interviewing is concerned. Give everybody a good guide sheet, get them on the same page. And then lastly, what does your time to interview look like? Is it too long? Is it too short? We had a customer the other day who told us they're going to go from a panel of 8 interviewing down to a panel of 4 interviewing. But they're going to extend this group interview with 1 candidate per time by another hour and a half, which means, in essence, this 1 candidate is going to have a 3.5-hour interview in one setting. So believe it or not, there's practicalities that made sense behind that. And a lot of the hiring managers are behind it. They said, okay, we'll save time. We'll take 4 of the people out of the equation, but we'll give a longer interview for the 4 that are there. It was a little bit confusing. There was some data behind it, but I would say that HR a lot of times has to be the guy that says, maybe that's not such a good idea. Longer isn't necessarily better. Maybe multiple interviews, maybe a Skype interview or some type of a technology interview first, and then our second interview. But looking at the timing of the interviews is critical. So you're all probably familiar with this picture of a black hole. And we tried, by the way, and we did find multiple pictures of new black holes. What was interesting is they weren't as scary as this one, so we kept it for the awe factor. Because measuring your candidate experience, which is something that we play a good part in, there's a lot of black holes. And when you're looking for the black holes, there's so much to be discovered within them. So, reasons why they're there, what your efficiencies are, where your software isn't working, where this other device can be at. There's so much to be learned when you look at your candidate processing, as far as offers, decline, backgrounds, and the total candidate processing. The reason we've included offers, decline, and background is because I think it's a part of the process that's kind of negated for its value, because you're like, okay, let's get through this, let's get it done and move on, instead of saying, what are we really finding here? And also, there's a lot of new vendors out there that can provide so much value, and even some of the more established vendors are coming up with even better solutions than they've had before. So if you haven't looked at how you're conducting your backgrounds, your offers, and your reference checking, I strongly suggest you take an updated look at that. Do you have a black hole? Do you have black holes? Where are they? We just talked about the importance of the candidate experience. Yet again, another seminar. However, if you do not participate in the Candidate Experience Awards, I strongly suggest you do that. The organization that does it is a total nonprofit. It costs you nothing. It does cost your time, which we know changing the wheels on the bus can be very, very difficult at times. However, the results are confidential unless you do very well, which it's very surprising sometimes to our customers who've done well. And it could be a small company, it could be a large company, either way. But as I said, they're free. They do the bulk of the work for you once you submit the data that they need, and it's responded back to you. It'll get you a lot of good information, and it'll tell you where you are within your competitive aspect too. Is it organized? Is it completed? And is it compliant? The rules keep changing every day. The federal administration in place right now keeps changing things. There's so many different things on the table. Many of the states have a lot of changes. The next few months, I think we're going to see even more as we come up on election. There's going to be a lot of last minute changes that get pushed into place. Are we watching that, and are we looking how that fits into our process? I'm going to go back to this bullet to the experience, because there's a lot of assumptions that go on in the process. And I think as organizations, we still tend to blame a candidate or say they're going to get back to us. And because we have different players involved, right? You might have a hiring manager, several hiring managers, or different people involved, team people, and then people within HR, and then HR business partners involved in the interview process. But yesterday, I did a final phone call. One of our customers is hiring one of the top 3 individuals in their organization, some very high-level position. And there are 6 people involved in this hiring process, and all 6 of them are committed to this candidate. They really want this candidate. They think this is going to be the answer to this position. Certainly looks like a good find, in my opinion, based on what they're telling me. And on the last call, which happened to be with someone in HR, I said, when are we going to have an answer from this candidate? Because we're hoping this candidate accepts, was what the resounding theme. And what HR said, well, let me look. And the last contact anybody had with that candidate was 4 weeks before. So senior level person. And then, we kind of disseminated that. So what the heck happened here? People on vacation. Somebody was going to reach out and then something happened. And HR wasn't involved in orchestrating that because there were so many other hands in a row. So now what's happening is, the question I had is, well, okay, is this person really interested? And if they are, they must have some pretty big questions if you haven't heard from them in 4 weeks. Or is it that they're saying, oh my gosh, I haven't heard from them in 4 weeks. In any case, this company has a great candidate experience overall, in my opinion. It's just very unusual that this fell out of place. And I think part of that is, at the senior level, they don't make these hires more than very often. So there wasn't protocol for this. As soon as there's a protocol or process, things can get lost. That's our job, right? And talent acquisition as the HR professional to ensure that there's process around these pieces as well. How are you recording the results of your process? Or, do you have a system that allows you to do that? If not, there's lots of them out there, and it's a great idea to take a look at them. And then finally, technology. I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say that, to my knowledge, there's about 3 different HR technologies born each week. Each week. So yesterday we were on the phone with one of the analysts in the HR technology space because we happen to have an HR technology that's launching in the fall. And it's amazing how much technology is going into our space. And if you attend some of these things, you'll find that there's some really cool technology out there. I've seen technology right now that 3-4 years ago was way too expensive, way too large, and wasn't going to give service to mid-sized market. And now there's technologies that have come out that are easy to use, web-based, that are much less expensive, that give you the same kind of solution. So as technology is changing at the speed of light, it's finally moving into HR. So if you're looking at what you're doing as a whole and you're looking at the complete recruiting continuum, you really need to pay attention to the new technologies that are out there. So reporting, again, a good picture. And as good as your reporting can be, the question that I always have is, do you have what you need, when you need it, and the way you need it? You can have scores of reporting, and this has been a personal experience that I've had, and I've heard it from my staff, my management staff, and I've heard it all the way down the recruiter level. It was just too hard to read that, or I just didn't get to that. Or I get that report every week, but I don't look at it. You gotta say, why am I not looking at that report? And one of the things, when they talk about HR coming to the table is, this is kind of what we get. No, this isn't what we get. If somebody's bothering to put the report together or pull the report, if it's IT or if it's from finance or whoever it's coming from, but it's not readable or it's not usable for you, the person who has to implement it, is it worth even getting the report? So I think it's time to flip the tables in those cases and go back and say, this is the way I need to see this data. How can it be managed and how can it be done like that? So many times when we're involved, that's what happens, and it's so much easier than you might think. It could be just moving a couple of things. It could be just a reprogramming of it. But are you getting it the way you need it? And then again, are you getting it when you need it? So if you need to have a daily report, even though you don't look at it daily because you have to stop, drop, and figure out where that candidate was from 4 weeks ago, you need to have access to that. And there's so many cool, even handheld and tablet technologies that are coming out now that are going to allow you to have this right at your fingertips at all times, that you really need to take a look at those if you aren't involved already. So under reporting, your cost of hire. If you don't know your cost of hire, there are a lot of calculators out there that help you figure that out. The one thing I will say about cost of hire is it could be subjective or it could vary. So if you're going to put together your cost of hire, which you should have, we'll talk about why in just a second, your cost of hire should be measured on the same points all the time. So if you're going to include things in your cost of hire, such as your time to fill or how your profit and loss statement relates back to advertising. Are contingent workers considered a part of that? If you have part-time staff, are they considered in the cost of hire? All of your activities. It just needs to be the same line items all the time. Draw a line in the sand and say, this is it. We're not going to move from this for a while. this is how we're measuring cost of hire, because there's nothing more frustrating, I think, than to go down this road and somebody say, I'm showing your cost of hire as blank, and you saying, no, my cost of hire is blank. And then cost of hire loses its ability to help anybody. At the same note, if you have a cost of hire that's measurable, that's effective, you can now build any kind of business case. So cost of hire, after you've built it, educates you on how much each individual or each particular hire can bring value to the organization and what your group is doing. And at the same time, it allows you to build a business case for those things that you might want to do to add to it. You know, for example, this will save us $4 on a cost per hire. A good example is we're looking at a technology right now for actually piloting a technology. So the cost to do this particular activity, in this case it's reference checking, seems minimal. Again, goes back to time. But when we ran a time study, the cost came out, I'm just going to use a figure, of about $100 a hire. The cost to use this technology at first glance, based on the amount of hires for one particular company, was about $4 a hire. But when they said $4 a hire, that's pretty high in the mix because we're paying a fraction of that for assessments. But when we compared it to the actual number when we did our homework, now we knew how much it was going to cost specifically. Well, wait a minute, $4 is a big saving. Maybe we should look at this. So reporting is really, really important in letting you build your best business cases. What are your best reporting vehicles? Best recruiting vehicles? If you don't know that, if you're just subjective and you really don't know what those are, you're going to spend a lot of time wasting time and thinking that you're getting somewhere. That's like that hamster wheel. What is your vendor spend? Many, many companies operate, and in this case, I'm talking about contingent spend. So your contingent spend's on one side of your financial balance sheet, and then your internal P&L is something different. And because your contingent spend isn't on there, you can kind of bounce those numbers around. But realistically, where does it belong? How much are you really spending when you take a look at that whole picture? Reporting applications we talked about. And then the last item for reporting is the term cost of vacancy. We have a whole paper out on cost of vacancy. So the cost of vacancy by definition is how much is it costing your organization to be down either this one position, this one seat within the position, or what's the cost of vacancy to have one person out. You can look at it from a global perspective through your whole organization, which is where we encourage you to start. So let's say you look at your company and you say, if I look across the board at all of our staff, if we are down one person throughout the entire organization, no matter what the position, it costs our company blank. You start there and then you break it into your individual subsections. Could be by division, it could be by job sector. I prefer job sector, I think it's more efficient. So you break it out and you say, what's our cost of vacancy if we are down a person in manufacturing? What's our cost of vacancy in sales? And we actually have calculators, by the way, available for this. But especially if you're looking at downsizing, right-sizing, moving locations, bringing new, have a large hiring initiative coming up, trying to influence hiring managers. Cost of vacancy has a lot to do with building merit and you being able to build an effective solution, but also take that effective solution in case to finance. Finance loves things like this. I think the most frustrating thing that I've seen for our partners is when they go to finance and find out, I know what the cost of vacancy is. And then they kind of tell you what it is. And it's just like the cost of hire. Do you want finance to figure it out or do you want to figure it out? Because it's hard to change somebody's head once they're already there. So by determining your cost of vacancy, understanding your cost of hire, keeping really good reports on reporting, you'll have a whole different perspective on how the recruiting continuum can be completed efficiently and raise those efficiencies. And then the last bucket is communications. So as we look at this picture, I'm just going to say, for the sake of presentation, over here on the left, let's say this is HR, and this is the hiring manager. See the pondering hiring manager. And then let's say over here, this is management. And then over here, we've got our outside suppliers, and this guy over here, he's finance. Right? Maybe we meet the guy in the laptop finance, and this is our outsourced providers or our technology providers. When we look at communications, it goes a lot further than, I talked to the hiring manager, this is what he said, and it comes back, if you really want to raise those efficiencies. You really need to know who are all the players to be on board. a good example of this, and probably one of the best learnings that I've seen on it, is Turner Broadcasting, I think it was 3 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago, decided that they were going to add 100 app developers, so app developers meaning the actual apps. And this is 3 years ago, so remembering apps weren't here yet, but they were on the cusp. App developers, and they were going to do it in 100 days. And then on top of that, they were going to have them all work out of Atlanta, which is where they're headquartered. So 100 application developers, which are mostly on the West Coast, and they needed it right away to get this up and running in 100 days, and they're going to have them in Atlanta. So how are they going to do that? And I've got to tell you, the end game is it was very successful. But when you look at where the success came in, they optimized the efficiency of the continuum, but they came on board with their hiring managers completely tied into their HR partners and talent acquisition. And then over here we had management completely on board, and over here we had the vendors on board and finance. Everybody was in agreement for this initiative, and every participant went home every night understanding what the objective was, where they were, and what their role was. There were ingenious ideas. The cost to get people on board, everything went much faster. In fact, when I saw this presentation, if anybody here has seen it, it was at the cable and television HR presentation that was actually at the CNN Center. What was most interesting to me is the people that spoke the least were talent acquisition. The people that spoke in that room really were the hiring managers, finance was in it. It was really, really impactful because you couldn't tell talent acquisition from the rest of the team. It really, really worked. And that's what talent is about. We don't live in this isolated bubble because that's just going to keep us more isolated. And the more we have finger pointing and just go get me a candidate, in today's world, that's just not going to work. With social media, with growing talent pools that we need to capture, we need to have everybody in the company understand their role. Now, that's not to say everybody needs to be doing the frontline recruiting or even needs to know too much about the continuum and the pieces of it. But we do need them to know that they play a heavy part. And the more they're involved, the better the outcome. So who's really on board? What are the metrics that you're sharing? Caution, caution, caution. If you overshare metrics, everybody becomes a guru. Everybody becomes the guy who knows the answer because your time to fill is one. They don't really know relatively if that's good or bad, by the way. So a little knowledge can be dangerous. So you just want to be careful on how you're sharing those metrics and that you're explaining them really well. And please learn this because we see that a lot of times that's trial and error. So you want to look ahead and understand what you're giving people. Do you have shared expectations? Okay, get me this candidate. I just actually this morning sat in on a call where our leads were talking to head of talent acquisition, and the head of talent acquisition is telling their hiring managers, there's no way you're going to hire 600 people in 3 weeks. And our metrics are telling us it's going to happen based on the pipeline. So that was a good conversation. But our hiring manager is saying, we don't want the expectation to be that you can do this all the time. And here's where the snafus are going to be in that. It was just a great conversation on the way around. It really was a good conversation because there was a lot to be learned from all 3 buckets. And in the end, that deadline has been extended. So even though it's doable, it wasn't the best thing for the organization as a whole. Alrighty, roadblocks. So where's your snafu? Where's your roadblock? And this also ties hand in hand with our last bullet here on advocacy. Building advocates within the organization for talent acquisition before you need them are so critical. Another secret sauce that we have here at People Science is for every single partner we have, we actually itemize out every single influencer, contact, anybody that we're involved with in the company, albeit finance, support personnel, anybody in HR, any hiring manager, assistant hiring managers, interns, and every one of those individuals, and sometimes that's 200 to 300 people in an organization. Every one of them are assigned to a person at People Science that's in charge of taking them from whatever their current status is, neutral, happy, hopefully never dissatisfied, but in the event that it is, all the way through to advocacy. Our end game is advocacy. We want everybody to say, this is a good initiative. So when you're in talent acquisition, you want everybody on board. We want to stay away from that old stereotype, right, of Toby in the office. Or HR is just not the right guy, or they have the intelligent documentation, the intelligent kind of responses that we're looking for. That's just not who we are, and sometimes we have to live through that. But building advocates are what does it. And then back to roadblocks. So, for example, we have a customer now that's had turnover of 3 hires in 3 months in one position, in a support position. And kind of the general consensus is there's something wrong with that manager. Well, realistically, those of us who've been doing this for quite some time understand and that this person has a good bit of worth to the company. And the chances of us leadership managing and changing this person to get a good person to work with them are slim to none. We'll leave that to training. We'll leave that to leadership. It's our job to find out who can work with this type of individual and how can we best fit that. So those tend to be the bigger wins. Like they say, the tougher they are, the faster they fall. They become the advocates faster than anybody else. So we always look at those as opportunities. So when you found these roadblocks, somebody's saying it didn't work for me before, it's taking too long to do a time to fill, or you can, kind of get through the bushes and find out who the issues are, the people that are disgruntled. They're the ones that are going to give you valuable information, maybe, or they could just be disgruntled. But more importantly, those wins, they tend to be the town criers that are going to bring communications together faster. I'm just going to turn to the team. How are we doing over there with questions? Okay. So this is our final screen before we get to references. And this is how good is your talent acquisition really based on your assessment? How will you fill the gaps to reach 100% efficiency? So thinking of the recruiting continuum, and again, you can do this on our website, or thinking of what you graded yourself on today during the conversation. How are you defining and attracting? And in this case, this particular customer gave themselves 30%. They felt like they needed to do more in defining and attracting. In recruiting, most of this got sourced to contingent partners, or they were being very reactive. Over here, they hadn't spent a lot of time on candidate processing. This, by the way, is about 5 years ago. Their change has been phenomenal. Interviewing, they felt like they were doing an okay job of climbing the ladder here. Reporting, they felt like they had really good reporting going on and really good communications. This is why we use this as an example, because it's interesting that they felt, because a lot of times you'll see this be lopsided. But in any case, what does yours look like? So this graph helps you when you're finished to say, where do we need our focus from that 100 feet out, thinking of the Zoom video that we watch. Examining the big picture first provides the better outcomes even quicker. So if you think you're drinking from the fire hose, and you think you're changing the tires while the bus is moving, if you don't go back to 100 feet, you're always going to be in that position. I can tell you, everybody we know that puts some practicality around this, that uses this, that optimizes their efficiency, goes from reactive into proactive, raises their efficiency, and gets better outcomes across the board. Okay. Michael, do you have questions already?
One question that came up was, what reports do you feel are the best to track success in recruiting?
That's a good question. It really depends on the type of recruiting that you do. So I would kind of, let me subdivide the answer on that by saying there's all different kinds of recruiting, so there's all different kinds of metrics. The first and foremost, I think, that you always need to look at is your time to fill. That's across the board for everything. The other part that you always want to look at is what is your ratio of interview to offer and your offer to acceptance, because that's going to tell you the quality of the interviews. So that's going to tell you if you're on the mark or not. So for example, here at People Science, in our VO partnerships, we're always shooting for a 2-to-1 interview to offer ratio, meaning for every 2 candidates, our hiring managers are going to offer 1. Your stereotypical offer is 4-to-1. So as you move up the scale and you get into executive positions, or companies have historically said, we'd like to see 4 candidates for every 1 hire. Our feeling is that the better job we do, the better all of us, meaning the entire population of talent acquisition, gets, the closer we should all get to that 2-to-1. So your ratio of how many interviews to hires, a really important number. Your time to fill, a really important number. Now they're subjective, right? Time to fill for an entry-level person with a large talent pool is going to be really different than time to fill for a developer, a digital media developer. Really different, right? So it's to understand where you are, and then really to sit back, and I would use the continuum to say, what is it that is really important to us in reporting so that we can optimize? So start looking at those first. I'll separate two things out. If we look at specialty recruiting, recruiting for things like digital marketers, actuaries, higher level engineering, things of those nature, reporting for that really should be, how are we affecting the candidate pool that's out there? And define and attract becomes really important here, because you're really going to be recruiting to what we term future fits. So an example of this is, you're building, and I'm sure, I think just about everybody has heard about this. It used to be candidates come in, we look at the candidate pool that came in, and that's what we offer. The higher specialty level positions, you need to be building a relationship because there's such a scarcity of that technology or those type of talent sets that are out there. So the higher the scarcity, the more future fits, the more relationship management you need to do. An example I can give you of that is if you've been to Disney World, and I happen to have been to Disney World 3 years ago with a 12-year-old, and we went on a ride, and the ride was branded all over, and it said Raytheon, Raytheon, Raytheon. So this was obviously something sponsored by Raytheon. But what was cool about it is, and maybe you've been on this, you go in and you use a computer and you create your own roller coaster or your own racetrack. And then you sit in a virtual reality seat and you ride your own racetrack, and you ride your own roller coaster. In this case, it was a roller coaster, which is crazy. In any case, this is my friend's 12-year-old who's now 15, and just again, a few weeks ago, he said to me, "What's the name of that company again?" He really wants to go into engineering, he believes, and I keep saying Raytheon. So I remembered the name for him a little older. I guess I got it quicker than he did. But I don't know if Raytheon's on the call today, but hooray. I mean, that's branding, right? And that's building a future fit. Because not only is the 12-year-old or the 15-year-old now going to tell his friends, right? But that's who he's going to think of when he gets out of school. Like, how is it that, there's that saying out there, everybody wants to be hired by IBM. Where did that come from, right? So future fit really has to do with who you're going to be in the future and building those relationships. I will give you one statistic that's really interesting about future fits too. Just by keeping those numbers for one client, we were able to increase our hires by 38% in less than a year in a specialty position where the cost of vacancy was about $1.2 million a year. That's pretty significant. So a 38% increase in the hires with a $1.2 million cost of vacancy. And that was all based on future fits. Started recruiting for them last July, and as we pull all the way through that cycle, we've now seen that the future fits are coming to fruition as hires. So that answered the question, I think maybe a little bit too intently. On the high volume side, there's other things that you really want to pay attention to, especially the candidate processing side. Rule of thumb is the higher the level of expertise, the more the spread on how you're recruiting, your techniques, and what you're using. And then as you change that to more of the lower skilled or entry level positions, a larger focus on what is our process doing for us? What's our actual candidate process look like? How are we measuring that, and how do we improve on that? Another question, Michael?
Another question that came up was, what do you consider to be the best recruiting vehicles?
Well, that really depends. Really depends on what you're doing, and you really got to do some discovery to figure that out. We could probably tell you that if we knew what positions, and you haven't listed those, but just for the sake of the group, I would take a look at where you are. I would take a look at your competitors. And we are almost out of time. I do want to show you something too that might help you a little bit, and that is, these are some creative ads that are out there. You could really use StumblePond and put creative advertising, and I'll kind of give you this. Close your windows, open a few doors. There's some creative advertising, right? We don't hire Turks, Greeks, Poles, Indians, Ethiopians, Vietnamese, Chinese, or Peruvians. We hire individuals, McDonald's. That covered a lot, didn't it? Diversity got your attention. And you can do these electronic format. I still see some companies using billboards. This was a personal favorite for design engineers. It always seems to be a big outcry for them. Put your design skills to better use. quite a grocery list. People who think like to do and people who don't make the best partners. Cornell University recruitment ad. It makes you think. And then the last one we'll show is here for the gap, working in a winter woolly land. So you can see the difference. The importance is to follow, under, define, and attract. Take a look at those steps, and it'll help you figure out what recruiting vehicles are best for you. I don't see any more questions, Michael. We're good for today.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. If you're interested in getting a copy of the program, this is our website. When we go to the website, this is our contact page. And if you leave us your information, then we'll make sure to get that back to you. If you're interested in taking the assessment, you can also find the assessment at our website. It'll give you, fill out this information and we'll send it. And then also at the website, if you go to how we work, and scroll down to self-assessment, this will take you through those buckets of the continuum that you can use, fill out percentages, and then it will submit it for analysis. This is for your analysis only, and it'll show you where you stand. And then once you've completed this part, if you click on here, it'll take you to some answers, some short answers. So we enjoyed being with you today. Again, if you have any questions, follow up. You can always reach us through the website. Thank you very much.